Okay, folks, I've pressed the record button and I think we're ready to get started. This is our third meeting of this equity sprint. If you haven't already, please take a quick look at the WebEx instructions to make sure you're in grid view. If you're comfortable turning on your camera, please do, and familiarize yourself with the chat, direct message, and raise your hand functions. So what we're doing this again, meeting 3, we're looking at specific equity improvements that we can try and get into this next upcoming round of IGP request for proposals, which we're expecting in April of 2024. And let's just jump right in. You've seen all these before, hopefully, but please practice democracy of time. Consider new possibilities to push the envelope, especially today in our breakout rooms. Respect and appreciate others' unique perspectives. Utilize the bike rack for any insights that are outside the scope of today's discussions. And finally, please just be mindful of who's in the room and who's not, who has a chance to speak for themselves, and please don't speak for anybody who isn't in the room. And now I'll turn it over to Dean for our message of aloha.
Aloha no, everybody. Aloha kako. It's been a while since I've opened with something that I usually would do at something like this, which is an ole aloha. The ole aloha was written by Auntie Ona Beamer as a greeting for all in camaraderie. So let us open with this. I'll pray our pule, Hawaiian style, and then I'll give you the makana, the gift of what our message is. Oh, na nei da hala me hale hua he hale le hua no ina ta no e no o ta uno e ne no e ne ale ne aha le ne ani mai no o tu I ti pun me te aroha aloha. In the message of aloha, we say he mamakana no ke yana ho makana upuna. These are gifts that have been given and handed down from our elders. So we look back to our past, we bring it to the present, and we look to the future where we're going with those makana, those gifts that are handed down from our kupuna, our elders. Thank you, and I wish you all an aloha. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Dean. Wonderful as always. So just quickly running over the agenda today, we'll frame up the conversation we're going to be having. There's 2 activities. First is prioritizing non-price evaluation criteria. So this is, again, RFP evaluation criteria and deciding what we think the equity priority should be for the non-price portion of the evaluation. So we're going to have a breakout activity, and then we'll discuss back together in plenary. We'll have a break. And then we'll have a very similar styled breakout activity, but the content will be different. That'll be improvements in the community benefits package, and then we'll come back together as a group and share out. Hopefully we'll have plenty of time for these discussions since that's the focus of our agenda. And let's see, some logistical notes. We're going to be taking, commission staff will be facilitating the breakouts, and we'll be taking notes through the whole course of the meeting. The plenary session, which we're in right now, will be recorded, is being recorded. And also the chat will be recorded from that, and we'll get that posted to the website as soon as we can. But the breakout rooms will not be recorded. Those chats will not be recorded. Only the notes that we take will be what come out of those breakout rooms, and those will not be attributed. So you'll have some anonymity there. If you wish to speak freely in the breakout rooms, please do. And I think, let's see, status, just so you know, we are here in the 3rd meeting. We're going to have a 4th meeting sometime in January. We haven't yet determined the date and time exactly, but we're pretty close. It's looking like towards the end of the month. We'll send that notice out as soon as we can. And then hopefully we'll wrap all of this work up into one, improvements for the IGP RFPs, and then 2, we'll actually get back to the tracks that we started this all with. So a lot more to come in this docket. And so now, if you haven't already done so, please feel free to get into the chat, introduce yourself, your name, your role, and your organization. And Pete, is this now time for you to frame today's conversation?
I think so.
All right, I'll turn it over to you.
All folks are introducing themselves in the chat. So thanks, Mike. Yeah, so just to give a brief overview of today's meeting objectives, Mike mentioned them already, but we're really going to be honing in on these two sort of solutions we're identifying for the integrated grid plan procurement processes, the request for proposals. So the first is to discuss and prioritize the non-price evaluation criteria to be used in these IGP RFPs. And the second is to discuss and identify improvements to the community benefits package process for the IGP RFPs. So I'll have two activities after I go through this sort of framing conversation, and I'll try not to be too long-winded so we can jump right in. But the activities will be pretty similar in structure, aimed at looking at the existing criteria, the existing community benefits package process, elevating improvements, and then discussing those prioritizing and discussing those improvements in much more detail in these breakout sessions so that everyone has some good opportunities to provide their input and shape these improvements. Could you move on to the next slide, please? And you can go to the next one as well. So I put together this little diagram just to ground us all, again, within the scope within which we're working for this series of meetings. So obviously we're within the energy equity and justice docket today. It's the scope of the energy equity and justice docket has quite a few different solution sets and issues that we're looking at. We've identified previously 5 sort of tracks to organize the different issues we've identified for energy equity and justice in Hawaii. And one of those tracks is the equitable siting and hosting of energy infrastructure. As we've presented in previous meetings, we are sort of taking a pause, a bit of a step back as we're developing our community outreach plan and procuring a consultant to assist with that before we're fully launching any of these 5 tracks in 2024. So we have not officially launched this equitable siting and hosting of energy infrastructure track. However, noting that the integrated grid plan requests for proposals, which will be the next procurement process for Hawaiian Electric for additional renewable energy, are forthcoming, and that process is underway with the draft IGP RFPs, the draft language scheduled to be filed in April or so of next year. We noted that this is a priority to set up this series of meetings to incorporate equity into those IGP RFPs. So that's sort of the focal point within this equitable siting and hosting of energy infrastructure track. A lot of issues have come up in this series of meetings, understandably, that are not necessarily within the scope of what we can do within this next set of IGP RFPs. We are noting those in what we've called the bike rack, which are issues that we intend to address and elevate either in the upcoming track that I have here or elsewhere in the energy equity and justice docket. The last thing I'll mention with this slide is you may have seen that Hawaiian Electric announced the Stage 3 RFP award group. I just want to note that we will not be discussing the projects selected from Stage 3 today, as these projects will be coming to us for decision making at a later point in 2024. Next slide, please. So to give a brief recap of the meetings we've had so far and where we're going in this docket. The first meeting back at the end of October, we focused on education and scoping for this docket. We provided a detailed overview of the RFP process, including different parties' responsibilities, and worked through an activity to identify the sort of problem statement for this issue in this series of meetings. All of the notes and presentations from these meetings are posted on the Commission's website shortly after after the meeting, usually within a few days if possible. For the second meeting, just a few weeks ago, we focused on perspectives on the RFP process with a few additional presentations focused on these two solutions, non-price criteria and community benefits packages that we're going into detail on today. And we also had a panel discussion to elevate perspectives on the RFP process, and specifically on the community benefits package component of the RFP process. So today we are in this meeting number 3, we are going to focus in more detail, as I said, on the non-price criteria and community benefits packages, with 2 activities designed to identify and prioritize modifications and improvements to these for the IGP RFPs. We'll have a 4th meeting in January that will be focused on 2 additional topics, RFP co-creation and community energy advisory boards. And then I've noted in sort of italics here this meeting number 5. After the 4th meeting, we intend to provide a staff report for participants to review and likely have a 5th meeting in this series focused on next steps following that staff report and more broadly on community input into the RFP process. I think I'll pause here. I think I see a few hands up. First, I see Dottie's hand raised. Did you have a question?
Sorry. Didn't mean to have my hand up.
Oh, no worries. Henry, I also see your hand up.
Yes, my question is the IGP RFP. Will the draft RFP be filed in the IGP docket, in the equity docket, or in the 2017 docket?
I believe in the commission's most recent order in the IGP docket, we noted that we intend to open a new docket for their procurements. So I think it would not be in any of those 3 dockets.
And
But
that
certainly
docket
it'll
would
be clear where
open
it's.
for intervention?
I do not believe that docket hasn't been opened yet. So
Yeah, I don't know that we've made any final determinations on that, Henry. We do intend to open a new docket for the RFPs. I think some final version of this group's recommendation will go into that docket, but whether it's going to be a repository docket, an adjudication, it's not. That decision hasn't yet been made.
So you'll want feedback on whether it should be PICO only or the public also?
That certainly would be welcome as part of the recommendations from this group. Absolutely.
thanks, Henry. Next slide, please. And so as we're jumping into these 2 activities, I did, in lieu of providing all of the educational information we've provided in the past 2 meetings, which are available online, I just wanted to highlight 2 things in particular. So the next slide. This comes from our first presentation in October, just sort of going over the commission's role and the commission's jurisdiction within the RFP process. So I have highlighted a few sort of roles / responsibilities that the commission has here. As we can see, we're sort of in this overseeing and reviewing the RFP and relevant materials process right now, where we're potentially providing guidance, issuing the staff report on improvements and modifications to the RFP for the IGP RFP process. At a later point, the commission will issue a decision, potentially approving the RFP prior to issuance. Following the RFP process, the commission reviews the PPAs to determine whether contracts are reasonable and in the public interest, focusing on a few issues, including those noted by our statutes. And then the commission is also, to some extent, involved with monitoring PPA compliance and development of projects. Although I will note this is one issue for the community benefit packages that we'll be discussing today, the sort of enforcement of those agreements and packages. Next slide, please. And then just to drill down again on the 2 issues we're covering today. So the non-price criteria are one component of the range of criteria that the utility uses to evaluate bids from developers in the RFP process. These non-price criteria are usually qualitative, but they can also be quantitative to some extent. A few examples listed here. There are 11 currently from Hawaiian Electric Stage 3 RFP, I believe. I also want to note that we are noting in the activity document that we'll be sharing during the activity has our initial list that we've put together from comments and feedback so far in this series of meetings of additional ideas for criteria. I wanted to highlight a few of those that also came up in some of the poll responses in the past meeting. One of them is how transparent the criteria are, the potentially having energy justice as a citing criteria, the energy efficiency of designs of projects, the waste generation associated with project development, contributions to the local economy, community engagement and co-design, the use of the land for other uses such as agriculture, and then indigenous sources of power production. And so the intent of the activity we'll be doing later will be to talk about these and also elevate other new non-price criteria in much more detail. The community benefits package is currently one component of the qualitative characteristics that we're sort of highlighting as a focal solution to talk in more detail and elevate improvements for. I'll note a few of the other, or a few improvements that have also been noted so far in this series of meetings, including from polls for these community benefits packages. One is having community consent as a threshold requirement. Another is enforcement of the packages, potentially applying monetary penalties on compliance with the agreements, the pre-selection of energy projects within this process, modifying the minimum amount or the structure of that minimum amount for the community benefits packages, and then developing community-based organizations to negotiate and organize on behalf of communities. So hopefully that gives everybody a brief overview, maybe gets the thinking juices started, thinking juices flowing as we move into these activities. I think that's it for me. So I will pass it over to Grace for the next slide, which I think is just a title slide. Yeah, over to you, Grace.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate that. So we're actually going to dig into this element of the RFP through an activity that we'll do together. We're going to get into breakout groups. I believe that we are being, those should be open shortly. The activity here is going to follow a couple of different steps. So first, your facilitator will give you another overview of the activity. Second, the group in your breakout room will brainstorm different non-price criteria that you all would like to see or that you could imagine being beneficial in scoring future renewable energy projects. So take a moment, envision what are the elements of a future renewable energy project that you think might be worth scoring them on and having a non-price criteria included in the RFP. For each group, we'll have a facilitator and a note taker. So for the note takers, they'll make sure to capture all of those ideas. Once we've spent some time just really collecting all the ideas that we have on the table, the group will try to identify kind of the top 3 that are rising to the top, the most important, or the ones that you want to discuss in more detail. As I noted, all of the ideas will be captured in the notes. So it doesn't mean, if your idea does not get prioritized or discussed in that section, it still will be captured. And once you all have a top 3 or a couple that you'd like to discuss further, there are a couple of guiding questions to help further flesh out that idea. So for each non-price criteria that you all have identified, you might think about what specific methods you would use to score bids based on the criteria. So are there, quantitative elements or different ways that you could imagine actually assigning a score to that criteria. Brainstorming what challenges you foresee with scoring projects objectively and accurately based on the criteria, sort of, trying to think through what are the potential problems with this or how could we improve it? And then any other notes or observations, like are there different things you want to think about with the group or kind of outstanding questions about the criteria that you're thinking through? And then we'll have a report back out at the end of the breakout session. Our second activity today is going to follow a very similar structure so that, we can all get a little bit more familiar with the structure and all of that. And yeah, I believe we are ready to move into our breakout groups. PUC staff, are you all ready with your Google Docs? I'll put them in our chat as well. All right. So at the bottom, let's see. David, are you helping us to assign breakout groups?
Yes, Grace, whenever you're ready.
Okay, perfect. I think we are ready. All right. Should have been assigned to a breakout room.
Grace, try clicking on the breakout link at the bottom. It should be highlighted right next to the record button.
Yeah, thanks, David. When I click on that, it's telling me I can't edit the breakout session assignments.
Oh, okay. Let me try to do it again.
Okay.
And for those of you who are still in the main room, there is a breakout room icon at the bottom. Looks like 4 squares. So you should have received an invite if you haven't clicked on it, but you've been assigned to a breakout session. Thank you.
Hi, I'm so sorry. This is Lauren with the Sierra Club. I tried to join a group and then I somehow logged out and it took me a long time to come back. Nice to get placed in a group. I'm so sorry.
Do you remember which group you were assigned to, or?
I thought it was one.
Okay,
I
we'll
don't
send you
know.
over there.
So sorry.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you. Hi, Aaron. I think you just joined us, and I've assigned you to a breakout session. Aloha, Megan. Are you just joining us?
I had joined and then my internet went out, so I rejoined. I was in breakout group 4.
Okay, I'll send you right there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha, Carice. Are you just joining us or were you in a breakout session? Aloha, Carice. Please let me know if you were assigned to a breakout session. Thank you. Aloha, Charlotte. Are you just joining us, or were you in a previous breakout session?
Aloha, I'm just joining,
Okay.
so I'm a little bit late.
Sure. Right now they are in breakout sessions. I will assign you one that's ongoing, and you have about maybe 20 minutes left. Thank you for coming.
Mahalo.
make it
out
through
different
everything.
groups again. Thanks.
Not enough time.
I hope you all had a really good discussion in your breakout groups. I certainly did. And now we're going to, Grace, I think you're going to lead us in the next piece. If you're back with us.
I am back.
Great.
So our next piece is going to be follow a similar activity pattern. We're going to be discussing the community benefits packages. So this is really, we wanted to continue on the robust discussion and panel that we had at our last meeting. We heard a lot of really good ideas, different perspectives, inputs on the experience that folks have had with community benefits packages from different perspectives. So we had a community voice, we had a developer voice, Hawaiian Electric also participated, and we had a robust discussion across the group about different experiences. But I think, you know, we didn't necessarily have time to dig into the solution set and how to kind of translate that. Oh, I'm so sorry. I am doing the wrong thing here. I think we wanted to do a share out from our breakout group. So I'm going to pause that conversation. Thank you for my team for reminding me. Okay. So we will go to our, we'll go to report out from breakout groups. What I would love to hear is which non-price criteria you all surfaced and elevated and had discussion on, and any sort of other findings that you all had. So we can start. I think my group was actually breakout group 1. So I would love to have a volunteer, or Dorothy, potentially I could put you on the spot as well to put to report back from our group.
Was there anyone from our group who wanted to talk about the points that we discussed? Okay, let me go back to what we had here. So there were a couple of points that were pretty insightful. We talked about project citing as one of the main criteria, the top 3, but not just areas that are historically deemed as like the renewable energy development areas are, let me pose a question here, that one of the methods that came into question, or questions about the method, were equitable distribution of megawatts in regions where there is less. A lot of people make good points about determining regions. There were some points about not having homes, not obstructing ocean views, citing high load areas. There was one point about demand and potentially covering parking lots in urban cores to meet those demands. A critical aspect to keep in mind was socioeconomic makeup of the areas. And then also land use factors historically helped gravitate developers towards areas such as agricultural land. And then we were able to also point or pinpoint jobs as another criterion, but not so much specifically energy jobs. And and also considering the duration of the jobs, short-term, long-term jobs, and if they're local, how many of those jobs go back into the community. I feel like I'm butchering it, so Grace, correct me if I'm wrong, and if there's anything else that anyone would like to add to that or revise to what I mentioned.
That was great. Thank you, Dorothy. Our group had a good discussion too about the trade-offs. You know, when you're scoring something more based on where it's sited, or you might have to use more expensive land, you're going to get a higher cost project. So it was a really robust discussion. Anybody else from group one want to add anything or highlight anything from our discussion? Great. Let's go to group two.
Thanks, Grace. So I facilitated group two, and I've successfully nominated Darlene to share out for us. So please take it away, Darlene.
Sure. So our three that rose to the top were safety, extraordinary resilience, local economic benefits, and beneficial project siting. And I can go into more details on each of those if you feel we have time.
Yeah, if you could, please.
Sure. On safety, extraordinary resilience, we would consider who's in charge of those areas. That would be weighted 5%. What is the plan? That would be weighted 40%. Where is the plan published for the public to be able to read? That's 5%. How is the plan executed? That's 40%. And why does the planner feel that the project benefits the community? That's 5%. We question who would be doing the assessing. Are they qualified, knowledgeable to distinguish between bare minimum plan and effective plan, and what is the rubric? And we came up with the possibility of having it scored by OSHA or HIOSH, and that it would be a minimum threshold activity, the safety specifically, whereas the extraordinary resilience would be a plus. And then we wanted to put a shout out in for local microgrids as being valuable. In the second one, the local economic benefits, we are concerned about measuring where the materials are procured from, what percentage of ownership is retained by local residents, what is the respective sum of cumulative salary of those involved. Benefits financially have to be like about lowering bills or offering credits. One of the concerns with this is how do we weigh all these criterias? There is potential overlap within the category and other categories. And then we do understand that majority of materials and ownership do currently come from out of state. And so it'd be a little tricky to massage. And the last one about the beneficial project siting. Our concern is about proximity to communities and kind of balancing the fact that there are some community supports of certain kinds of projects, such as near shopping malls or what have you. The project should be scored by residents in terms of proximity, and for projects to distinguish which low income and overburdened community is nearby.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Darlene. Anyone else from group two feel like we missed anything or need to add anything? All right, hearing none, let's pass it over to group three.
We have Sebastian, who will be presenting from group three.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? I've changed my mic setup. Okay. So group three spoke on a number of topics, similar to the other groups. Our top 3 criteria were the community outreach criteria, but expanded to include community engagement and community co-design. The second was impacts to the local economy, and third was environmental considerations, and kind of under an Aloha Aina mindset of what's best for the environment and for the people of Hawaii. Going back to community outreach, co-design, and engagement, the group mentioned doing it early and often, tracking demographics, assessing the engagement for quality. Is the process one directional outreach, information sharing, or is it a bi-directional co-design that everyone, including the community and the developers, can be learning and growing and formulating this project together? Some of the challenge associated with that was getting a good team, a good facilitation team, ideally rooted in community, and funding is getting money in place to enable this work to be done in a paid capacity. We had the pleasure of having 2 folks who were involved with the Molokai CRAP from the community's end. And so they mentioned that having a paid capacity to help organize the community was very important. And then for our second criteria, impacts the local economy. This includes local workforce development. And there was some discussion on what's local and what are good jobs. And there's also a mention of percent community ownership and thinking about how does local economy development translate into minimizing or eliminating this sense of extraction, wealth extraction from communities, and using that wealth to empower the community further in a more circular fashion. And then we didn't have enough time to really flesh out our third criteria. But hopefully I did a good job. I kind of organized my thoughts over here, but please, Eric or anyone from group 3, fill in the gaps. Mahalo.
Thanks, Sebastian. Anybody else from group 3? All right, let's hear from group 4.
Grace, we had a very spirited discussion in group 4. Lots of exciting ideas were shared. We also had a lot of insight from the HECO team to help us understand a couple elements already established in the criteria. So that was really great. But I will turn it over to my colleague, Max, to highlight some outcomes from our discussion.
Yeah, so I think in group 4, a lot of like the other groups, conversation focused on community engagement and the quality of that engagement and the challenges surrounding how to improve that quality of engagement. Specifically, we talked about things like when that engagement happens, how to put engagement on an equal footing between parties, namely communities and developers. What happens, what arises between, when the communities can't reach consensus, or they maybe have faced challenges of who exactly are the community and how that's defined in particular. But I think that, and then also beyond the engagement, what's the ownership model look like within the community in relation to the project? Could there be possibilities around ownership and directly funneling the benefits from the project into the community and making sure that in that ownership, there's also decision-making power that sits with the community? We talked briefly about other aspects that were important, such as economic impact, how it contributes to employment potential, workforce development, net impacts. So if a project is going to possibly displace other economic activity, what does that look like? As well as project characteristics such as scope and size, or the end of life plans around projects. Specifically, what does the distribution of large versus small projects look like as that relates to community opposition, and if there would be less community opposition to smaller scale projects, but that would be a trade-off with meeting our 2045 goals possibly, and what that means overall for everybody. We didn't quite get to talking about specific quantitative criteria for how these would affect the projects, but I think that we had a very fruitful discussion overall about how to improve the quality of engagement. But if others, particularly Marty or Robin, who contributed, would like to chime in case I didn't quite capture things, please do so.
I think you got it. You did a fine job. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin.
Thanks, Group 4. Back to you, Grace.
Awesome. Thank you. I think we just have Group 5 to go.
Awesome. I'll pass it over to Tyler to share a broad report out, and Charlotte, apologies if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. If you wanted to use this space to finish sharing your point on the ownership model, I think that would be a great contribution. So over to you, Tyler.
Based on how community outreach and land use should be very heavily scored. And then I offered that shared ownership should have a lighter score or be part of a different scoring system. For community outreach, the criteria would focus more on what type of outreach should be happening, whether it's educational versus collaborative. Since it's a different model of discussion, whether or not you're just explaining the benefits of the project or eliciting concerns, or if it's a collaborative idea, which would then, intrinsically affect the pricing criteria. If the community doesn't want that many windmills, it's going to adversely affect the pricing criteria as well. And then the challenge for that is defining the community and then weighting the voices from an equity standpoint on differential impact. Should these people's concerns be weighted heavier than others? Or are all voices considered equal? With the consideration that with the heterogeneous nature of Hawaii and even the access to technology is differential between islands and regions, how does that community outreach impact people who their regions never were electrified? For land use, the focus on the challenge is the time impact and the flexibility of the project long term. As Hawaii moves towards decarbonization, land use changes are a monumental portion of carbon emissions and carbon mitigation. And so how will the project be able to adapt 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line to changes in laws or requirements from the county or state? And then for the ownership model, the challenges is who gets to own. Will there be equity considerations at that? For example, somebody lives in the community but then moves out. Do they still have a right to their ownership of the parcel? And then the primary challenge is that this is going to be, it's probably the easiest of the criteria for the community to fixate on. And so no matter how much you do, if you do 20% community ownership, why isn't it 25%? And then also regarding the community outreach, the intrinsic problem is it's never enough. The Board of Water Supply did 2 years and I think 40 or 50 different community outreach meetings, and it still wasn't enough. And so being able to define what's enough, but for doing your diligence, that doesn't adversely affect the project or scalability of it. And I think one of our breakout room people wanted to finish their thought from the session.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. That was a really great overview of our session. I was just kind of really getting to the point about like you were saying, identifying who would own parts in this, right? I was working around to finding how do we build capacity within the communities to live in these spaces, to be able to be part and bring value to these projects, and also finding developers who are willing to partner and help raise up communities like that. The reason for that too is because communities can see longer lasting benefits besides just the community benefits packages that are developed, but also in the long-term spaces on this is just growing. There are many community organizations, businesses to be able to partner, or that they're able to partner with. I'd love to see that grow towards the willingness of having these and not only be outside, and I say outside not derogatorily, but not located here, right? So we keep more of our economics here in Hawaii, and hopefully closer to our own neighborhoods and communities. So I was just trying to get to that point. So mahalo.
Mahalo, everybody, for sharing. I think that brings us to the end of this share out, and we'll go to a break here until 10:45. It sounds like we had some pretty productive discussions on non-price criteria, and we have the notes captured from each breakout room as well as the recording from this share out as well. We'll return at 10:45 for a similar activity discussing community benefits packages, and I'll put the sort of instruction guide for that in the chat now so that you all have it when we move into that activity. Thanks.
Hey folks, hopefully people will start trickling back in and turning on your cameras as soon as you're able, and then we will get into the next breakout activity. So as Grace had mentioned before, our next breakout activity is going to look a lot like our first one, except in its topic, but the format will be the same. This time we'll be discussing community benefits packages. So as soon as you're ready, David, would you please put us into our new groups? We're going to be assigned to different groups just to shuffle up folks, but we'll do the same sort of activity on community benefits packages.
I apologize, Mike. Did you throw it over to me? My computer is having issues this morning.
No worries, Grace. I saw your message in the chat and I just asked David to throw us right into our breakout groups for this second activity.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cindy, you know. For those of you in the main room, if you have any issues accessing your breakout session, please let me know. If you're in the main room and you have issues logging on or accessing a breakout session, please let me know. Aloha, if you were in an assigned breakout session, please let me know what number. Thank you. Aloha, Michael. I see that you just joined us. Were you in a breakout session? Hi, Mary. If you're just joining us, we will be closing our breakout session in a few minutes, but we can do the recap as soon as the groups come back to the main room. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Your ongoing participation.
Kate? Kate? I don't know if you're there. Maybe we bumped back. I'm really
Mike, you are muted.
Of course I am. Someday I'll figure this all out. Welcome back. I hope you all had good breakout group discussions. We're going to do the same thing we did before. We'll have report outs from each group, and then we'll close up the meeting. So if that's all right with you, I'm going to kick it to group one.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. We had Kylie volunteered to share out from our group.
Okay, we talked about a lot of things, so I'll try to briefly summarize here. The first thing we discussed was perhaps providing direct bill credits to ratepayers in the vicinity of a project as an alternative option to the $3,000 per megawatt community benefits packages. And it sounds like there might need to be some legal research as far as whether the PUC can legally do that because of issues around preferential rates. We also talked about allowing community ownership in a project to take the place of a community benefits package. And we just had some questions about what that would look like. How do you decide who owns the project? And there could be complications with legal liabilities that come with project ownership. One person had the point about, from the developer perspective, of needing to ensure that the community benefits package requirements are fair across the board. So the suggestion was a $3,000 per megawatt or some other amount that's the same for every single project, so that we don't create a situation where the community keeps expecting more and more and can point to other projects that are providing more than another. And then as far as community benefits package enforceability and transferability, there's a suggestion that perhaps terms could be built into the PPA, that the community benefits packages would be enforceable by the PUC and run with the project, so that if a subsequent developer buys a project, then they're still bound by the community benefits package requirements, and the PUC has the continuing ability to enforce the CBP terms. We also talked about the possibility of having a compensated community-based organization to facilitate the community benefits packages. And there was a point raised about this could mean that less money actually goes to the community. So maybe one alternative would be to just identify a nonprofit organization that already has employees that could administer the process. And then the last thing we talked about was, how do you define community consensus around a community benefits fund? And one suggestion was that it should be quality over quantity. The developers and HECO should identify key community leaders, like community organizations, AHA Moku reps, homestead associations, neighborhood boards, and other elected officials, to see what their views are on a particular community benefits fund. And then the counterpoint to that was that the developer doesn't necessarily want to be making those kind of calls and making the call between, like, if there's disagreement in the community, like, which side should the developer choose? So it was a lot of questions, but a robust discussion nonetheless. Thanks.
Thanks, Kylie. Any other observations to share from group one before we move over to group two? All right, hearing none, and if I've missed you, feel free to put it into the chat. For group two, we've nominated Abby. So please take it away.
Hi, everyone. So for group two, the first one that we chose was to prioritize effective and meaningful community engagement early in the scoping process. We combined two of them, actually. So it was the effective and early community engagement, and also with having that compensated community-based organization to assist in community meeting promotion. We thought that cohesion was really important to kind of enable that space of potentially like a diverse group of people from the community with different ability to participate in community engagement. If there's kind of differences with work schedules and availability. There were, yeah, just the honestly, I don't know what the middle kind of section was, but this was, or specifically, but it would help streamline the planning process if there were concerns that were brought up from the community, if they're addressed early on. And it could help level the playing field, so to speak. Oh, thank you. Help level the playing field, so to speak, when hearing the community's voice, providing that access. And then for 2, we chose customized benefits for communities. And for this one, it's important because if there are externalities like negative impacts due to the project, it's important that the affected area, there's an avenue that they could be compensated. And I think that could help with negotiations and mediation during the planning process. And our first point kind of creates that bridge to be able to do that and to move through the planning process with that input. And then for our third one, it was require a detailed rubric from Hawaiian Electric on the utilities assessment of developer community outreach and engagement. We were a little cut short on this one, but we had that members of the community will be informed on the planning process or the steps taken. We were a little unsure how much could be really accessible for the public, but I think it's important to have some type of kind of accountability measure with the steps that are taken for this process and to really show and, reflect what, even if you can't really show everything that's like the responses to the rubric, the community knows it's taken into consideration and there's a certain threshold that has to be met.
Thank you, Abby. Any other thoughts from group 2 before we hand it over to group 3? All right, group 3, you're up.
Thanks, Mike. I think we had a few of our participants had to head out to other commitments, so I will share some of the highlights of what we talked about, but if others involved in the group want to provide additional comments, please do so after I share a few. So one of the improvement ideas we talked about, which I think has been touched on by some of the other groups, is modifying the structure of the benefits. There was some discussion about whether $3,000 per megawatt per year is too low or is the appropriate structure, whether changing that to something like a percentage of the project's profits or the project's costs. I think working through that would be one issue we noted a bit. Another improvement idea we talked about is generally empowering communities to take the lead in drafting these agreements. And so this would look like a few different things from our discussion. One would be additional education and sharing of resources by the commission or other agencies, including, good examples of community benefits projects, bad examples of community benefits packages, for these communities to have a better understanding and a more of a level playing field with developers in moving into these negotiations. And I think it would also, from our discussion, it would also involve the communities, jumping into the process to work on these agreements earlier. One phrase that I think was brought up that I particularly liked was who has the power of the first draft of these agreements, which really sort of shapes where the process goes. There's also, related to this, a lot of interest and discussion in community co-design, which is an alternative framework, but would empower communities almost to a much larger extent in sort of drafting the project itself beyond the agreement, which I think we're talking about in one of the next meetings. The third improvement idea is determining how to define the host community. And so we talked about this in the context of how you can do this with, Native Hawaiian methods of defining community with the ahupua'a, and, how there might be other methods to do this, but that this is sort of really an important step in building consensus for a project and for a community benefit agreement. Also related to community co-design, it was mentioned how having community co-design would sort of negate the need to define the host community, because the host community is the one, designing the project, the RFP process, more foundationally as well. I'll stop there and provide some space for anybody else from Group 3 to provide additional comments.
Thanks, Pete. Any last words from Group 3? Feel free to speak up now or put them in the chat. But if I don't hear any, I think next up is Group 4. Group 4, we're ready for you.
Thanks, Mike. Again, spirited discussion was had. Appreciate the openness and very out of the box type ideas that were shared in our breakout. So I'll turn it over to Max to share further.
Yeah, I think in Group 4, it was a very spirited discussion, particularly around the language and the temporal nature of these community benefits plans. So specifically, the three things that the group identified were shifting the name from community benefits plans to community benefits programs. And that would convey the long-term nature of the, contribution by these, developers to the communities, and reflect that how the priorities change over time, create institutional knowledge in the communities, and that it would be a consistent and constant flow to the communities, not just a one-time, infusion from that, particular benefit package or plan. So I thought that was an interesting one. Related, we also talked a lot about the long-term engagement, how that engagement should happen early on and over time, how there should be documentation about that engagement so that there's, again, institutional knowledge and a written record of what's happened and who was involved to improve the relationship of the engagement, and whether it's with individuals or community benefits association, so that there's a broader distribution of, and access to that engagement from the individual to the collective. We did talk a little bit about community ownership models and that around associations and experiences from other markets in the UK and Europe and Ireland, Scotland. But we didn't get too far into the nitty gritty of that as we lost time. But I also want to say if Dottie or Katie or Charlotte feel that there's something to add in my summary, please do so.
Any last words from Group 4? Feel free to speak now or add it to the chat.
I think we're all set. Thank you.
All right, Group 5, take us home.
I can share out on behalf of our group since I neglected to elect someone for this role. Apologies about that. So Group 5 shared a lot of similar conversation points to what folks have already surfaced in this report out. I'll say that we spoke about the recommendation that came out of earlier conversations in this proceeding on prioritizing effective and meaningful community engagement early in the scoping process. And one of the things that got mentioned in our breakout room was through that process, addressing a sense of exploitation that can be induced by the community benefits package process. So this idea that packages can further create fractures in the community, and doing more co-creation alongside of the developer for the communities to really holistically make decisions is necessary input to address some of these issues that community benefits packages can create. We heard, we also spoke about community ownership models and the need for community ownership on certain projects, exploring the space of the percentage of ownership and wanting to keep economic value and wealth localized to the community. On that point, we spoke about how different communities need different things and how it's really necessary for the community to be involved in the benefits definition. So while some communities may not want to host additional infrastructure or have additional infrastructure built, some communities might. Some communities might prioritize reduction in energy burden, and so reevaluating and ensuring that the community input process is reflected in the final CBP that the developer is using. I'll say one other point that came up was on this issue of preferred rates. Thinking about how that conversation has been had in the past, not wanting to create inequities in rate structure, but as this has played out, wanting to encourage a reconsideration of this approach, because there is a value in having preferential rates, or there may be a value in having preferential rates for different communities that are located or where energy infrastructure is cited. I want to provide an opportunity for anyone else in my group to share anything that you think I may have neglected in this report out. Marty or Sebastian or others.
Just one quick thing. I heard some resonance with one of the other groups talked about changing the name from package to program. One of the comments we made in our group or talked about in our group was how, if we are thinking about these packages as more than just movement of, money, but more about like co-creation and ownership and shared decision making, then this idea might be actually more beneficial. Just stretching the idea of package.
Any other reactions from group 5? Feel free to put them into the chat. But thank you all for your report outs and for having really good detailed discussions in our breakout groups. I'm going to start sharing slides once more so that we can discuss our next steps for this docket. Here we go. Hopefully that's coming through on folks' screens. So as I mentioned at the top, and I'll say it again, we're going to have another meeting. We're looking at a date at the end of January. The objective of that meeting is going to be discuss our proposed solutions, including RFP design and community energy advisory boards. We're going to have some significant presentations from some of the community members who've been part of this docket so far, so we're creating some space for that. We will have pre-reads, I hope. The notice with the date, the link, all of the pre-read information should be going out hopefully within the next couple of weeks for our meeting at the end of January. So please keep an eye out for that. If you or anybody you know wants to be involved in this docket, please sign up for email updates. David is going to put a link in the chat. So that's one way to get it. Also sign up in CDMS to subscribe to this docket, and you'll see any notice that gets filed. Anything else that gets filed in this docket, you'll get a chance to see that. And then, as Pete alluded to, we're thinking about a 5th meeting to kind of wrap this series up, and that would be following a staff report, a draft staff report, where we try and really compile what we've learned, what we've heard, and everyone should have an opportunity to both read it before we have that meeting and comment on it, so that then at that meeting we can really just polish it, make sure everybody at least understands what the set of recommendations are, and hopefully build some consensus around them. So that's what we're looking at. Meeting 4, end of January, probably a meeting 5 following the staff report, and then we'll finalize everything and get it into the next, into the the IGP procurement docket. And with that, I'll leave you with, as I always do, a poll. There is should also be a link in the chat, but this is a chance to provide additional input if you didn't feel comfortable speaking up. This is another way that you can provide input on any of this, the substance that we discussed today and on this whole series of meetings. So I'm going to leave this slide up, but if you can, please do respond by the end of the day tomorrow. So end of the day, Wednesday, December 13th. And unless anyone else on the PUC side of the house has anything to say, I think that wraps us up for today. So thank you, everybody, for your continued participation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.